Welcome to the Mets pod. Cue up the memes, the Wolf of Wall Street, I'm not effing leaving, and John Wick saying, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back. The saga of who's on first has finally ended. Pete Alonso is coming back to the Mets. Cue up the emergency pod. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And in a way, Pete Alonso joins the show as a Met, as officially back in the fold. The saga, the wait is over, Joe. My goodness, how many conversations did we have about this? And like I predicted, pretty close to it at least, I said Thursday, Friday, crazy time here down in New Orleans, Radio Row, all different kinds of things going on for the Super Bowl. That means Pete would sign back, and certainly enough, here we are.
I just want to apologize and also thank everyone on Twitter that I saw that tweeted at both me and Connor looking for this podcast. I just want you to know that the reason it was slightly delayed is because Connor is a big star, as he mentioned, on Radio Row. And he had to talk to Malik Neighbors. He had to talk to Justin Jefferson. He had to talk to Ashton Genty. And he's made time to talk about Pete Alonso returning to the Mets. And Connor, I have one word to say about this. Finally.
Dude, I'm with you all the way. My goodness, it started to feel like it was never going to happen, even though the whole time you and I have said every single show, even when it felt like the Mets pivoted, that it just makes too much sense for both sides. We never even heard of another deal out there for Pete, and this is a chance for him this season to be the Mets' all-time home run leader. And the Mets had a hole in their lineup, specifically at first base, that Pete Alonso, at least in the short term, is the right guy for. So both sides came together. They figured it out because as Mets leadership in this era often does, Steve Cohen, David Stearns, they find a way to get deals done and find common ground. Just a 2-year deal here, Joe. I think even the people that were expecting a low-term kind of deal for Pete, I think you and I were looking at it and going, hey, probably 3 years. He gets an opt-out after every single year. He gets some security. This Joe, he has the opt-out after 1 year, but a 2-year deal for Pete is just wild to read.
I was surprised that ended up being what it was when the deal came together. And Will Salmon over at The Athletic, friend of the show, said that the Mets offered the 2-year, $54 million contract that Pete inevitably took. But they also presented him a 3-year, $71 million deal with the opt-outs as well. And he chose this 2-year, $54 million, I think largely because of the first-year salary, where he's going to be making $30 million in the first year of this deal, which makes him the highest paid first baseman in the sport right now, which is one of those barometers that you and I have talked about on this show for the last month and a half that we've been talking about Pete Alonso. And so they hit a barometer there, and he gets the opportunity to opt out if he wants to after this year and get back into the market. I look at this deal as optimal for the Mets. I don't think it could have gone really any better for them. And what they did was they bent a little bit on the dollars. They could have held firm if they wanted to, but I think part of it is you want a happy guy coming to sign his contract, not so much someone that's like begrudgingly taking a deal. And on Pete's side, as I said, he got the highest salary this year amongst first basemen. So considering his market was seemingly non-existent, this isn't a terrible outcome for him either.
No, it sounds like you got a $10 million signing bonus. I mean, if you've listened to the Mets pod, a theme of this show that Joe and I often discuss is, and if you're new, hello, and thank you for being here. Don't leave us. Stay for the entire season and beyond. Is that, Joe, cash is a real thing in sports. I think a lot of fans don't realize it because we are so educated, not in baseball because there is no hard salary cap, but in cap space. We talk in luxury tax terms in baseball, but cash is a real thing amongst ownership groups and enables or unfortunately prevents a lot of the times front office executives from doing things that they want to do. And one of the biggest advantages the Mets have had in the Steve Cohen era that you can feel the change is their supply of cash, upfront cash, is one of the best in all of major sports, quite honestly. I mean, that's why they can give a $10 million signing bonus to Pete Alonso. Let's be real. I don't think anybody else was doing that. That's why if they need to, they don't have to defer all this money down the road to keep their stars, unless it just makes sense logistically for them to do that. And we've talked about it. It allows you to be big time players in the short term market. I consider 1 to 2 year deals the short term market. Even Sean Manaea back on the 3-year deal. Obviously, Manaea is a guy that got really, really good AAV. You look at adding a guy like Minter. You could shop in the high end of the reliever category because you don't really care about the term and you have the short term cash to get it done. It's interesting. If you asked me a year ago, do I think the short term cash would be a big factor in bringing back Pete Alonso? No, I thought Pete Alonso would have been all about term. But guess what? The term wasn't out there for him. And the Mets knew that. And credit to David Stearns, because knowing the market is a huge part of this job. And you don't ever want to play yourself, is basically what they call it. They were patient. They had to listen to fans chant and yell at them at Amazing Day. And there was a lot of heat. It was uncomfortable at times. We were on this podcast many times saying, man, like something's got to give at some point. And at the end of the day, Joe, yeah, it's a lot of money for anyone for Pete Alonso, but David Stearns actually looks like the guy that came out on top in all of this.
And he got booed at Amazing Day. Can you believe? Can we really believe that?
Not the best.
I think what ended up, I think, being really big here. Andy Martino of SNY and a couple others have reported along the lines of a couple days ago, Steve Cohen, David Stearns, Scott Boras, and Pete Alonso all sat down in Florida to kind of talk things through. And I think, to my point, kind of at the top of the show, about wanting everyone to be happy, I think they needed to hear out Pete Alonso, who, as much as we have covered this and really hammered it from the business side of things, we can't forget the personal side of this, which is Pete Alonso had expectations of getting a long-term good money deal. And it really is swallowing pride here. He was able to express his viewpoint here, and the Mets were able to express to him that we understand, but this is the market and we still want you. So I think they both had to sit down and confirm to each other, we still want this to continue. And they were able to come to a good conclusion. And I think Pete Alonso will show up to Port St. Lucie in a good mood, in frankly, a motivated mood, because this is betting on himself for a second time, really, after he turned down the 7-158 a couple of years ago. And this is betting on himself again. And he has the opportunity for it to pay off in a big way, because you are putting him in a lineup with Francisco Lindor, with Juan Soto, with Mark Vientos, with Brandon Nimmo, with a potentially elevated Francisco Alvarez in 2025. It's just, to me, the perfect fit for this year. And the Mets were able to maintain the term that they ultimately desired.
And it's a great call bringing up the motivation factor. If you're Pete Alonso, you have no plans on playing on the second year of this contract, right? Like that's just a little safety blanket in case, you have a really, really bad year. Even if you got hurt, there's a chance you opt out. Like it is that kind of structure of a deal. This is a deal that I think was written to opt out. So Pete Alonso will be motivated to have a bounce back season across the board, end up having the most home runs in Mets history, and along the way with that, getting more new money. I mean, and the bar is so low when you look at, if he finishes, he obviously plays the 1 year of this contract to clear the opt-out barometer, which is, hey, another 2-year deal and all this new money and another signing bonus. So at the end of the day, yeah, you're right, Joe. There will be a motivation factor here for Pete Alonso, which if you are the Mets and you are a Mets fan, I think that's a really good feeling. You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Joe, let's talk about I think we know who plays where. It's pretty obvious this keeps Vientos at third. Pete obviously is playing first base. No surprise there. But how do you see the top of this lineup shaking out? It feels like the Mets have a couple different ways they can write this thing, where to me, the obvious is Lindor leading off again because he was just phenomenal there. And Juan Soto, you want him to get as many bats as you can. You bat him behind Lindor at number 2. But how do you, Joe, balance the power that the Mets have in this lineup after that, obviously headlined by both Vientos and Pete?
I agree with you, Connor. The top 2 should be Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto. You want your
every day.
You want your 2 best hitters getting the most plate appearances. And I know math, and the leadoff hitter and the second hitter get more plate appearances than everyone going down the lineup. I think the 3-4 I can be flexible with. I think it is some combination of Pete and Mark Vientos. Whether that is, do you want to bat Alonso third as a semblance of protection for Soto and then Vientos after him, or do you want Vientos third with Alonso kind of protecting him a little bit? But I mean, Connor, let's call it what it is. We're debating
First world
something.
problems.
Yeah, first world problems here. We're debating something that I think, and it's not really a debate, but there was on Twitter, that's for sure. Either way, I think the lineup is set up really well. For me, I'm going Lindor, Soto, Vientos, Alonso, Nimmo, Alvarez, and then I'm talking the DH platoon, and then McNeil and the center field platoon. And that's how I would do the lineup. What is kind of your full look at it?
I'm right there with you. I think that when it comes down to it, you're just going into the season. Lindor and Soto are written in ink at the top there, and then you can kind of play the analytical matchups between Vientos and Pete in the 3 and 4. And then the 5 to me is so interesting because it's just, what Brandon Nimmo are we getting this year? Are we getting the Brandon Nimmo that wants to kind of, drive 25 plus home runs out of the ballpark? Or are we getting a Brandon Nimmo that wants to sit there and take 12 pitches and getting back to being an on-base machine? Because then you kind of have this weird luxury of having 2 separate lineups built into one. And what I mean by that is, of course, Lindor, Soto, say Vientos, and Pete. But then do you kind of start the lineup all over again by having a leadoff style hitter in Nimmo at 5, a guy that, say, against lefties, well, it doesn't matter. Just say a platoon of Winker and Marte at 6, guys that can drive Nimmo in or move him across the base paths. And then what Francisco Alvarez are we getting this year? Because if we're getting the Francisco Alvarez that hits 27 home runs, well, I want Alvarez to be able to clear, the Nimmos, the Martes, and the Winkers of the world. That's why I call it 2 lineups. It feels like you're having the top of the lineup all over again after you clear the first 4 guys. What an amazing situation to be in with the Mets. And maybe I'm just being optimistic and projecting the best of Brandon Nimmo, Jesse Winker, Starling Marte, and Francisco Alvarez. But I mean, Joe, why can't you dream big right now when you look at the top 6 or 7 of this order?
And it isn't wild to think Brandon Nimmo is going to bounce back. It's not insane to think 23-year-old Francisco Alvarez is going to play maybe a little closer to the 2023 version of Alvarez. And the DH situation, little in flux. I think obviously who you have with Winker and Marte, like the physical people. But what Jesse Winker are you going to get? Are you getting the guy that prior to 2024 had to take a minor league deal and seemed like he was almost on his way out of the pros, and he goes on and has a great year for Washington, gets traded to the Mets, has a good playoff run, and earns that next contract? But ultimately, Connor, I think this is probably the deepest this Mets lineup has been since 2006.
I agree.
I can't think of a time any more recent. So a splendid job by David Stearns and this Mets front office for putting this lineup together. And I think, as you said, it's our real first world problems if we're complaining, oh no, how are we going to make room for all these guys and make it make sense?
An absolute bow on an amazing Mets offseason. We've had so much fun covering it. And a reminder, we're not done. The Mets pod will be in Port St. Lucie for a live show on February 22nd before the first spring training game, of course, at Clover Park. We'll be set up right outside the main gate. Show starts at 11 a.m. We have a special guest, and I mean a special guest, that we will reveal on next week's normal episode of the Mets pod. Make sure you're subscribing, of course, so you never miss a show like these that is randomly recorded on a Thursday evening, because once again, I am down in New Orleans. So I apologize to all our loyal listeners that have been waiting for this. And, obviously I apologize to you, Joe. You've been ready to roll for about 24 hours. We've been excited about this. And the best part is Pete Alonso is back with the Mets, and this offseason is complete. We look forward to seeing everybody, of course, down at Port St. Lucie. This is the Mets pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Once again, subscribe to the show, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like watching the show, you could always watch it on SNY's YouTube channel. If you want to be involved in the show, a lot of ways to do that. Leave a review with a question. We often read all of those. or you can comment in SNY's YouTube comments as well under the show, and we will pull questions from there. You can tweet at Joe at PSL Flushing. When he tweets out, the mailbag tweets every single week. Pete Alonso back with the Mets. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.